Florence Wakefield did not cry when she heard it. That surprised her, later, when she had time to think about it. She had always been someone who cried easily. At hymns, at the first snowfall of winter, at the sight of a child stumbling and getting back up. But standing in the narrow corridor between the butler's pantry and the kitchen door, with a platter of cold oysters balanced in both hands, and the sound of her husband's voice drifting through the gap in the pocket door, she did not cry. She only stood very still, and listened, and understood. 4 years of marriage had sharpened her hearing in ways she hadn't chosen. "Come now, Wakefield," Charles Hadley was saying, and she recognized the tone, the particular looseness of men who had consumed 2 bottles of Madeira between them and felt comfortable. 4 years in, are you a satisfied man? There was a pause, the kind Florence had learned to read. Gilbert always paused before he answered anything personal, not because he was searching for the truth, but because he was calculating how much of it was safe to release. "Satisfied is a complicated word," Gilbert said. "Then give me the uncomplicated answer." Another pause, shorter this time. "She's a perfectly capable woman." Laughter, low, knowing. Capable. That was Creighton, Gilbert's partner at the firm. That's a word a man uses for his bookkeeper. Florence manages the household with considerable. Gilbert seemed to be reaching for something, and what he found was precision. But Gilbert's voice dropped to the register he used when he believed he was entirely among friends. "Between us? I chose duty when I should have chosen differently. My father's arrangement, not mine. If I had the chance again, same circumstances, same options, I would not have chosen Florence." Florence's hands did not shake. The oyster platter did not tilt. She stood in the dark corridor, and the words rearranged every memory she had of the past 4 years into something she no longer recognized. She thought about the dinner party she had been preparing for 6 weeks. 3 dozen guests, the governor's attaché among them, seating arranged with the precision of a military campaign. She had managed the menu, the flowers from 2 suppliers, the extra staff hired and briefed, the particular care required when placing Mrs. Hadley next to anyone connected to the textile dispute her husband had worked against. She had done all of this while also managing Gilbert's correspondence. During the week he was in Boston for depositions, tutoring the daughters of 2 clerk families, whose fees she had quietly reduced without mentioning it to anyone, and sitting up 3 nights running with a woman from the laundry district, who had worked for their cook's mother, and had taken ill with no one to call on. Nobody in that dining room knew any of that. That had never been the point. She walked back into the kitchen. She set the platter down with the same care she brought to everything, steady, precise, silent. The kitchen girl looked up. Florence gave her a small nod that meant nothing was wrong, and everything was fine, because it was not this young woman's evening to carry what was wrong. Florence went back to her guests. She refilled glasses. She redirected a conversation that was sharpening toward politics. She made sure the governor's attaché felt his presence was valued, and that Mrs. Hadley's preference for nothing heavy after 8 o'clock was accommodated without comment. She did it all perfectly, because she had always done it perfectly, and she was not going to stop on the last evening it would be required of her. At 11, the last carriage rolled away from the house on Elm Street. At 11:15, she went upstairs while Gilbert was still in the study going over a deposition with Creighton. She did not take much. The gray wool dress she had arrived in Hartford wearing, 4 years ago, before she became Mrs. Wakefield. Her mother's garnet ring, which had been hers before the marriage. The small account book she kept separate from the household ledger. The one that held the money from tutoring, 3 years of coins, pressed into her hands by families who could not afford much but insisted. It was not a fortune. It was enough. She left the jewelry Gilbert had given her. Not because she couldn't use it, but because it wasn't hers. It was Mrs. Gilbert Wakefield's, and that was a woman she was in the process of stepping out of. She wrote 3 sentences on the writing paper she kept on the vanity. Left it propped against the mirror where he would find it. "Gilbert, I heard you tonight. I am not angry. I simply understand something now that I had been avoiding, and I think it is better for both of us that I do." She signed it Florence, not your wife, just Florence. She went out through the side door at the end of the hall, not the main entrance. It was November, cold and clear, the kind of New England night that gave no quarter. She walked to the end of Elm Street and kept going. The morning arrived without mercy, as mornings do when something has gone wrong, and the day does not know to wait. Gilbert found the note before he found the absence. He had come to bed late, assumed Florence was asleep, and didn't notice until morning that the sheets on her side were too cold for someone who had simply risen early. He went downstairs. The house had the hollow, slightly disordered feeling of the day after a large gathering. Moved chairs, the smell of extinguished candles, the general evidence of something concluded. She was not in the kitchen. She was not in the parlor. She was not in the small sitting room she kept for her own correspondence, the one off the back hallway that Gilbert had entered, perhaps 4 times in 4 years of marriage. He went upstairs and found the note. He read it twice. He sat down on the edge of the bed. He was not a man who sat down unintentionally, and read it a 3rd time. I simply understand something now that I had been avoiding. He had not known she was in that corridor. That was the first thought, when there were so many thoughts that should have come before it, and he recognized the priority of it as its own kind of indictment. He had been certain he was among friends. He had been performing the particular cynicism that men of his standing performed for each other, the routine deflection of sentiment that passed for honesty in rooms like that. He had not meant it, but he heard himself saying it anyway, from inside his own memory, and tried to hear it the way Florence must have heard it from the corridor, holding a platter of cold oysters, and could not breathe for a moment. He went to her sitting room. He stood in the middle of it for the first time in recent memory and looked. There were more books than he had realized: law, philosophy, the practical guides of a woman who had always been educating herself alongside every other task. She had annotated them in pencil, small precise notes crowding the margins. On the writing desk was a separate ledger that was not the household accounts. He opened it. He had never looked at the household accounts. He gave Florence a quarterly allowance, and trusted her to manage it, the way a man of his position trusted competent people to handle the details. He opened the separate ledger expecting something smaller. What he found was not small. The household ran more efficiently than he had understood, not by a moderate degree, but significantly. She had renegotiated the coal supplier's rate by building a relationship with the merchant's wife over 18 months. She had reorganized the laundry schedule so the work could be done by 2 women instead of 3, without reducing their wages. By eliminating redundancies, she had identified herself. There was a column labeled simply charitable disbursements that accounted for several $100s over 3 years. Fees. She had quietly reduced for tutoring students, medicines left for households near theirs, a contribution to the Congregational Church's Winter Coal Fund that had been made anonymously. Anonymous. She had given money regularly and not signed her name to any of it. He sat with the ledger for a long time. He closed it and put it back exactly where he had found it, with the particular care of a man who has just understood that he has been careless with something irreplaceable. Then he went to find his wife. He did not send messengers. He went himself, on horseback, in the November cold, following the routes a woman traveling alone might take. What he found, in every town between Hartford and Providence, was not what he had expected. He had expected people to know Florence as Mrs. Wakefield, the attorney's wife, a secondary figure identified by her connection to him. What he found instead was people who knew her as Florence. At the dry goods store in a town called Wethersfield, the woman behind the counter said without hesitation, "Mrs. Florence?" She came through spring before last with supplies for the Carey family. Husband was laid off from the mill. 4 children. Paid 3 weeks of staples, and wouldn't let them know who had done it. The woman paused. We've been wondering when she'd come through again. At a church hall in Cromwell, the minister told him quietly, "A woman matching your description has been contributing to our reading program for 2 years. The children here have better books than most of the town's private schools." She always mailed the donations, never signed the card. Outside Providence, a woman named Mrs. Kearns, who ran a textile workers' aid society, said, "Florence Wakefield is the reason we have a night school for the mill girls. She organized the whole thing from Hartford, found the teacher, arranged the space, wrote the curriculum herself. I assumed she had told her husband." Gilbert stood in Mrs. Kearns' parlor and felt the full weight of what he had not been told, and of what he had never thought to ask. He rode home in the dark and sat in his study until the fire went out. He had been asked by a colleague if he was a satisfied man, and had answered with the easy cynicism of someone who had not been paying attention. He had not been paying attention. That was the truest and most damning thing that could be said about him. Not that he was cruel, not that he had intended to wound her, only that he had been living in the same house as someone of this scope. Someone that strangers in 3 towns knew and depended on, and had summarized her, from the inside of comfortable assumption, as merely precise. He had looked at a full river and seen still water. He had never thought to look for what was moving underneath. He left Hartford 4 days after she had. He found her on a Thursday. A woman at a boarding house in Warwick, Mrs. Tanner, quick-eyed and frank, the kind of woman who decided things about people in the first 30 seconds, told him that yes, a woman of that description had stayed 4 nights, paid promptly, and had helped with the winter-preserving jars on her second morning, without being asked. I told her she was a guest, Mrs. Tanner said. She told me she couldn't watch a task that needed doing and not do it. She studied Gilbert. She left Monday. Said there was a school in Millbury that needed a bookkeeper and a part-time teacher. A pause. You the husband? Yes. Mrs. Tanner looked at him the way women of her particular efficiency looked at men they hadn't decided about yet. She didn't say a word against you. Not one in 4 days. A beat. In my experience, that tells a man more than if she had. Millbury was a mill town 20 miles south. Gilbert found the school, a converted warehouse room on the edge of the mill district, smelling of sawdust and lamp oil, on a Friday morning. He heard her before he saw her. She was teaching a young woman to read. Not a child, a girl of perhaps 16, a mill worker, hands rough from the looms. Florence was sitting across from her at a table, patient and unhurried, the way she was patient and unhurried with everything she actually cared about. She was saying, "You know every one of these words already, in your mouth. It's only that we're teaching your eye to catch up to what your tongue already knows." Gilbert stopped outside the window. He stayed there longer than he needed to. He was thinking about Mrs. Kearns saying I assumed she had told her husband, and the cold, specific certainty that Florence had not told him because she had long since stopped expecting him to ask. He went in. She saw him from across the room. The expression that crossed her face happened too quickly for him to read all of it. Something moved through surprise, and something else, more complicated, and landed in the careful, composed stillness he had seen 1,000 times and was only now beginning to understand the cost of. She said a quiet word to her student. The girl looked at Gilbert with the frank suspicion of someone who had learned not to trust men in good coats, then gathered her things and left. Florence walked toward him and stopped with 6 feet between them. I found a woman in Cromwell who told me about the church reading program, Gilbert said, because he had rehearsed a dozen openings and this was the one that came out. Before that, Mrs. Kearns at the Aid Society. Before that, a woman in Wethersfield who told me about the Carey family. Florence was very still. I have been asking about my wife for 10 days, he said, and every single person I spoke to knew exactly who you were. Something shifted in her face, not softening, a recognition of something she hadn't expected to hear. They're kind people, she said. They don't know me at all, he said, and they spoke about you the way people speak about someone they trust. And I have lived in the same house with you for 4 years, and told Charles Hadley you were capable. As though that were the size of you. What do you want, Gilbert? I want to explain. Don't. Her voice was not harsh, quiet and direct, the particular patience of someone who has thought very carefully about what she will and won't accept. Don't tell me you didn't mean it. That isn't where I need you to start. He closed his mouth. Something made those words available to you, she said. The performance for your colleagues. Something made that feel natural. I need you to understand what that something is. Not to protect my feelings, for your own honesty. He thought about this without the protective surface of professional competence he had worn. So long he had stopped knowing it was there. I stopped seeing you, he said. I don't know if it happened gradually, or if there was a specific moment when I decided you were simply functioning correctly and therefore didn't require attention. He paused. I treated our marriage though I treat a case that is proceeding well. No news is good news. I never asked what you were managing, because I assumed that management itself was your satisfaction. Florence looked at him for a long moment. The mill sounds came through the walls, the low rhythmic pressure of the looms. There's a boarding house 3 streets north, she said. Mrs. Pelham's, clean rooms. She held his gaze. I'm not ready to discuss what comes next. You need to understand that. I understand. I mean it. I'm in the middle of something, Gilbert. I'm in the middle of finding out who I am when I'm not building someone else's life. She looked at her hands briefly, then back at him. That takes time. I won't rush it because you rode down from Hartford and feel terrible. I know. Can you wait, she asked, not will you try, can you? It was the kind of question Florence had always asked. the kind that cut through the comfortable answer to the actual one. "I don't know," he said, "but I'm going to find out." He took the room at Mrs. Pelham's. It was small and cold, and the window looked out onto an alley where someone kept chickens with strong opinions about the morning. He lay in the narrow bed the first night and thought about what she had said. "I'm in the middle of finding out who I am when I'm not building someone else's life." He had never had to find that out. He had been Gilbert Wakefield, son of Harold Wakefield, attorney of the Hartford firm of Wakefield and Creighton, since before he could carry the name with any understanding of its weight. He had grown into a definition of himself the way a house grows around the frame that was there first, and had never asked what he would be without it. He did not go to the school the next morning. He went instead to the Mill District's business office and introduced himself. Not as Gilbert Wakefield of Hartford, which meant nothing in Millbury, but as Gilbert, with some experience in contract law, willing to be useful if anyone needed it. The office manager, a compact woman named Mrs. Harden, who had made an extensive career of deciding who was and wasn't worth her time, looked at his hands and said flatly, "We'll see." He stayed for 3 days doing work he was not good at. He made mistakes. He was corrected without apology. He came back the next morning anyway. On the third day, he saw Florence on the main road at noon. She was walking with 2 of the mill girls she tutored, both of them talking over each other, while she listened with the full attention she gave to things she cared about. She saw him across the road. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then one of the girls said something. Florence replied, and they moved on. She did not look back. But she had not looked away either. He told himself this was something, and was careful not to make it more than it was. The complication arrived on a Wednesday. He was coming out of the business office when he recognized the carriage. A private hire from Hartford. Stepping out of it was his sister Viola, 34 and unmarried, with the particular competence of a woman who had spent her adult life being the most organized person in every room she entered. Behind her, with the expression of a man who had been roped into something he already regretted, was Charles Hadley. Gilbert stopped on the sidewalk. Viola had the grace to look only slightly caught. "Charles told me where you were," she said. "I was worried." Charles should have minded his own affairs. "You've been gone nearly 3 weeks, Gilbert, and before that Florence." Viola glanced around the street, lowered her voice. "People are talking. The Hadleys, the Crenshaws. There are stories going around about the dinner party, and if it continues much longer it will become. It will take as long as it takes." His voice had not risen. He had become, in 3 weeks, considerably better at keeping his voice where he put it. "Florence does not set her schedule based on what the Crenshaws are saying." Hadley shifted. "I only thought if someone could speak to Florence." "No." Gilbert looked at him directly. "Charles, you were in that parlor. You were part of the conversation she overheard. I am not angry about that. I said what I said, and that belongs to me, but you do not get to be the one to fix it." He held Hadley's gaze. "Go back to Hartford. Tell people whatever you need to tell them. This is not a situation that requires intervention." Viola was watching her brother with an expression he hadn't seen from her before, not the usual faint exasperation, something else. "You've changed," she said. "I've started paying attention to things I should have noticed 4 years ago." She was quiet for a moment, then more carefully, "I may have said some things, to Mother, about Florence." She stopped, that she was cold, that she didn't engage enough, that she was too contained. "She wasn't cold," Gilbert said. "She was careful. There's a difference. She learned to be careful because nobody around her asked her anything about herself." Viola absorbed this. Her posture, the armor of it, shifted by a small but visible degree. "I'll go back," she said, "and I'll set the story straight in Hartford as much as I can." "I'd appreciate that." He told Florence about it that evening. She listened without expression until he finished. "Viola's the one who told me I was cold," she said. "Not angry, just noting it." "I know. She visited 4 times in our marriage. I made sure her room was warm and the meals were what she liked." Florence set her papers down. "I never once thought she considered me cold." "She didn't know you. I didn't know you. The difference is I should have." Florence looked at him sideways. "You stopped Hadley from coming to speak to me." "He didn't have the right. Most men in your position would have let him. It would have been easier. Get the wife to come home. Restore the appearance of normalcy." "I'm not interested in the appearance of normalcy," Gilbert said. "I'm interested in you." The November light was going fast. the particular swift withdrawal of warmth that New England did without ceremony. "There's something I need to tell you," Florence said. "I've been waiting for the right moment, and I think—" She stopped, breathed once deliberately. "There isn't a right moment for this kind of thing." He waited. "I'm expecting," she said. "I found out 2 weeks before the dinner party. I had been planning to tell you that evening. That's why I was carrying the tray myself. I wanted to come to you directly, in the kitchen corridor, before the guests finished their last course." She held his gaze. "I was on my way to find you when I heard you in the parlor." The world was very quiet for a moment. Gilbert sat with it. The precise shape of what she had just told him, and the shape of what it meant. That she had been carrying news of the best kind on the night he had said what he said. That she had walked away from him while carrying it. "I'm not telling you this to change your calculations," Florence said, with the firmness of someone who knows the difference between being cared for and being managed. "This child is mine. It isn't a reason to come back before I'm ready, and it isn't a reason to stay away. It's simply the truth." "Florence," he said. "I'm going to need you to let me finish something here first," she said. "The school. The girls I've been teaching, I won't leave them without a proper arrangement." "Of course." "And when I come back," she stopped herself. Not if. He caught that. So did she. "I have conditions, for how the household is run, for how decisions are made, for how you speak about me in rooms I'm not in." Her voice was steady. "I spent 4 years being invisible inside my own marriage. I won't go back to that. Not for anyone's comfort." "Put everything on paper," he said. "I'll read every word." She studied him. "You might find it difficult. Reading what I actually needed, and understanding how long I went without it." "I expect I will," he said. "I'd rather find it difficult than not know." Winter came in hard that year. January, before Florence was ready to leave Millbury. The school had a new teacher by then, a widow named Mrs. Birch, from Worcester, competent and thorough, who had spent her first days asking Florence detailed questions about every system she had built and writing the answers in a notebook. Florence had watched this and felt something she hadn't prepared for. The satisfaction of work that would outlast her presence in a place. A mill girl named Wren walked her to the road on the last morning. 13 years old, with her notebook already tucked under her arm, and the particular gravity of someone who has recently discovered she is good at something and intends to be unstoppable about it. Her foreman had told her once that girls who read too much get ideas above their station. She had written Florence a letter about it on her second day at the school. 2 careful pages asking whether she thought this was true. Florence had written back, "The people who say that are afraid of what happens when women understand the full reach of their own capacity. Come to the school on Monday." "You're coming back," Wren said at the road. Not quite a question. "To visit, and you will write to me." "About every book I finish," Wren said, "even the boring ones." "Especially those." Florence looked at her. 13 years old, entirely certain of her own ideas, unbothered by their size, and understood clearly what she had needed to find out. That she could build something. That she had always been able to. That the capacity had never required Gilbert's acknowledgement to exist. She carried that understanding with her back to Hartford. The house on Elm Street looked the same. Unchanged, as houses always are, indifferent to what happens inside them. Florence looked at it through the carriage window for a moment before stepping down. "It's going to feel different," she said. "Yes," Gilbert said. "Good different," she said, as though settling a question she had been asking herself for 2 months. "That's what I'm here for." That evening, Gilbert found her in the sitting room she kept for her own correspondence. She was at the writing desk, working through a letter to Mrs. Kearns at the AIDS Society. The lamp was warm and she did not look up immediately. He set something on the corner of her desk, a ledger, new, clean, good leather, the kind meant to last. "I went through the household accounts," he said, when she looked up. "All 4 years. I documented what you managed and what it would have cost to hire equivalent work through outside contractors. The supplier negotiations, the staff reorganization, the charitable disbursements." He paused. "I put it in the ledger, what you did, and what it was worth, because it should exist in a document that is not anonymous." Florence looked at the ledger for a long time. "It's not a transaction," he said. "I know it isn't. I'm saying I see what you built. I see what you gave and what it cost. And I want it to have a record, because you deserved a record all along and never had one." She reached out and opened to the first page. She read. She closed it. "Sit down, Gilbert," she said. He sat, not across the room but in the chair at the corner of the desk. close but not presumptuous. I have been thinking, Florence said, about what it would mean to do this right. Not to go back to what was there before. To go forward to something that doesn't exist yet. She laced her fingers together, her habit when she was being deliberate. I need you to do specific things. Not promise to feel differently. I'm not interested in promises right now. I need you to do differently. Tell me. Every week, you ask me one real question. About my work, about what I'm thinking, about the people I've spent time with. Not a courtesy question, a real one, and you listen to the answer without waiting for the part that involves you. He held her gaze. That's the first thing. The second is that when you are in a room full of colleagues and they ask about your wife, you say what is true. You don't have to praise me. You only have to tell the truth about who I am. She watched him. Not what I manage. Who I am. Done. She looked at him for a long moment. The lamp between them, the winter pressing at the windows, the long specific work of honesty laid out in the space between two people who were finally, carefully, beginning it. The child will come in July, she said. I know. A great deal can change before July. A great deal has already changed, he said. Since November, more than changed in the 4 years before that. Something passed across Florence's face. Not the careful composure she wore in uncertain situations, but something more unguarded. The particular expression of a woman who is checking whether she can trust what she sees, and finding, with some surprise, that she might. She reached into the desk drawer and took out the most recent letter from Wren. 3 pages about a book on natural history, and why the section on migration patterns was relevant to an argument she was currently developing about workers' rights. She's extraordinary, Florence said. So are you. It came out without arrangement. Not a statement prepared for the right moment. Just the plain fact of it, said in a room with no audience and no performance required. Florence looked at him. He did not look away. I have known that longer than I acted on it, he said. That's the part I'm going to spend the rest of my life not excusing. She set the letter down. She picked up the new ledger and opened it to the last page. Blank, the way last pages in good ledgers always are. Left open for what hasn't happened yet. She slid it across the desk toward him. I want you to write the first word, she said. Not me, you. He took the pen. He didn't search for long. He wrote one word at the top of the blank page and handed it back. Florence read it. Something happened on her face then that was not the careful, contained expression she had worn in this house for 4 years. It was the full version, open, real, and entirely her own. The face of a woman who has finally stopped managing what she allows herself to feel. The word he had written was seen. Outside, Hartford went on about its evening. The lamplighter moved down Elm Street. The cold pressed steadily against the glass. Inside, 2 people sat at a desk with a lamp between them and the long honest work of a real marriage. Finally, on equal ground, beginning.